Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PLAR podcast, where we explore all facets of prior learning assessment and recognition. I'm your host, Natalie DeVoe.
And I'm your co-host, Andrew Skapenko, and we're excited to introduce the guest of this episode. As the Director of Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition at Thompson Rivers University, 22 years as a career educator and an enthusiastic researcher, Susan Forseille has been privileged to work in and conduct research around multiple intersections of career development, prior learning, and education. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Simon Fraser University, a Master of Education from Thompson Rivers University, and is currently doing her PhD from the University of Leicester. Susan is a passionate PLAR advocate, believing adult learners acquire a great amount of knowledge and skills through life and work experience.
Our second guest, Nicole Borhaven, is a PLAR advisor at Thompson Rivers University. Nicole's role is to coach students through the PLAR process. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a certificate in liberal arts from Simon Fraser University. She has been with TRU-OL since 2010 and has experience in program advising and accessibility services. In her spare time, Nicole enjoys spending time with her family and friends, writing, traveling, and enjoying the great outdoors. Welcome to this episode, Susan and Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So the first question that I put out to both of you is, can you give us an overview of the recent conference that you attended? Perhaps you can tell us about the ideas that you learned at the conference, the people, the atmosphere, any aspects of it that are memorable to you.
Thank you for asking that, Natalie. It was such a good conference. It was the 4th annual Validation of Prior Learning, the Biennale Conference in Iceland, in Reykjavik. It was held from May 19th to 20th. And so the common theme, or the theme of this year's conference, was building a common ground, validation of prior learning for integrated approaches in lifelong learning. And it was an excellent opportunity there was over 250 participants face-to-face and 50 virtually. And we came together to share ideas, practices, what are we doing with prior learning assessment, or as we call it, PLAR, and specifically with some guided discussions on how we can how validation processes can become an integral part of services for lifelong learning, and how PLAR can become an integral part of policies for skill supply, reskilling and upskilling with the dramatic changes we're seeing in the labor market. The atmosphere, I would say, because this was for many people their first face-to-face conference since the pandemic started, there was very high energy, a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for us all to be in the same room or the same venue, and just that opportunity. So many of us work in isolation with prior learning, for us to be together with like-minded people that are doing similar work. It was a real gift. Nicole, anything you wanted to share with or add about the conference in general?
Just really high energy and just the openness. I'm just always fascinated meeting people from the different countries and nationalities and hearing their perspectives. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, it really was. So we went to Iceland one day early. There was a number of people that we'd been talking to virtually over the last few years about what was the PLAR work they were doing and what were their hopes moving forward with PLAR. So TRU, Thompson Rivers University, we organized like a pre-conference day. We rented a meeting room in the hotel where the conference was, and we invited people that we'd been talking to, and just really informal chance to get together and talk. Because you know how at conferences, you just don't always have a lot of time to do those networking pieces. So we pulled about 10, 12 of us together to talk about what we're doing with prior learning. And it was primarily people from Canada and Ireland that attended that pre-meeting day. And, just good conversations, developing really healthy relationships. And one of the things that really highlighted for me that one meeting day, and I was glad that we had that day because it was an initiative that Ireland's doing to develop a national recognition of prior learning framework with their public post-secondary institutions. So when they started this initiative, there were 17 of them, and they've merged some of their schools. So now they're down to 14. But just hearing their stories about how they've been building that national framework, how they've been building consensus, who's doing the work, how are they funding it, what are their goals, that alone was well worth that day, that meeting. Yeah. Nicole, did you want to talk a little bit about some of your highlights for the conference?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Susan. I've been a PLAR advisor for about 11 years now. Within PLAR, my scope is really centered around students and their experiences and how to support them. So when I go to a conference like this, it's really eye-opening for me. I feel a little bit sheltered around these broader terms and contexts that PLAR is working within, with industry and whatnot that's not related to post-secondary. I love getting that perspective. And of course, when we go to a conference, we all look at it with a different lens. And my background is in social services. So the thing that really was, a highlight for me was that skills are one of the messages is that skills are like currency, which feeds the economy. So this is a huge piece, but skills are also personal. So there's a social justice and social sustainability piece, which I was really happy to see highlighted over and over again. It was a big emphasis there. The idea being around everyone should have equal access to lifelong learning and have this recognized as a human right. You know, Susan can attest to this. We see it with our own students at TRU, that PLAR, when we can help students make that learning visible, it increases their self-esteem, it increases motivation. And this is so huge around a social justice piece. Being in Europe and hearing so many of the European countries speak, a big focus was on the migrants and immigrants with the war in Ukraine and so forth. Just to run some stats by you, it's pretty incredible. There are 272 million international migrants, 25.3 million refugees, and 41 million displaced people worldwide right now. And many of these people don't have documentation of their studies and what they've done. Validation, it's just a powerful tool because their prior learning may not otherwise be made visible without PLAR processes. So it was really fascinating to hear discussions around that and what these countries are doing to assist these migrants and immigrants. So that was definitely a highlight for me.
How many participants were there at the conference?
There were 250 face-to-face and 50 virtually.
It's quite a good number.
So it was a good number.
Yeah.
Nicole, I was wondering if there were one or two countries that stood out in terms of the work that they're doing for those populations that you just described.
Oh gosh, let me see. I know that, well, Ireland definitely spoke to it in our the day before the conference. I think about 2% of their population right now is Ukrainian, and so they definitely spoke to it. But yeah, you know, I don't know, Susan, do you recall specific? I know it was kind of a broader context, but
there was a few conversations around that. So I know I spoke to one woman from Sweden, and we were talking about the number of displaced people that had relocated to Sweden, and Germany and Austria was another conversation. Germany has taken in so many of the Syrians and Ukrainians. So yeah, it was so heartening to hear that there was so much care and concern about how that we could use PLAR to support these people. And for me as a Canadian, it really put into perspective how sheltered we are in Canada from what's happening in Ukraine right now. Yeah. Another session that really stood out for me, and speaking about it, kind of like that social justice piece, was the United States has a new initiative. It's called Credential as You Go. And many listeners will know Dr. Nan Travers. She's been such a seminal researcher in prior learning. And recently, her and a group of other researchers received this funding from both the Lumina Foundation and the US Department of Education, recognizing that there's 33 million Americans, or 1 in 6, that have some post-secondary education but no degree. So that was kind of like the impetus of those people that have started their post-secondary education but haven't completed it, are treated as if there's no learning. So they've developed this new model or a new movement moving forward, and it's called Credential as You Go. And it's moving away, and this is going to scare some universities here, from the degree-centric model of post-secondary education. And it's looking at new forms of learning that would include micro-credentials, industry training, self-learning, MOOCs, and just that recognition that people learn in many and multiple ways. And there's a way that we can assess this and credentialize it in a really rigorous and way that gives us confidence that that learning's been met. And so they've been given millions and millions of dollars to develop this, and they're just entering into phase 2 now. So it was, I've heard rumblings about the work that they're doing, and to have Dr. Nan Travers present on it, it was maybe my favorite presentation at the entire conference.
Just to add on to that, Susan, just about the universities and how there was a lot of talk about post-secondary really needing to keep up with these shifts. I spoke with a fellow from Spain, and he said that many of the universities there have shut down because employers are offering the training, and they're saying that universities haven't stayed current with what the industry needs and what the employer needs. So there's been a conflict between the two as a result. And what this fellow was saying was that, rather than there being conflict, they really need to come together. So we heard a lot of talk around learning opportunities being accessible even outside of post-secondary education. And there's a lot of learning spaces in Europe, lifelong learning centers. There's 17 across Iceland, actually, and that are really promoting this and moving away a bit more from this, as Susan said, this kind of university-centric model. Yeah, there's a cultural shift changing here with this school-centered education, and just acknowledging the value of different learning systems and personal agency. So that was interesting as well. There was, I watched a presentation by Dr. Oran Doherty from Ireland, and he gave a presentation on VPL for the Irish retail sector, and it really highlighted how industry and post-secondary can come together. What happened here was that the retail sector approached their educational institution and asked them to design and deliver an apprenticeship program for current employees interested in management and increasing their skills. And again, this is in the retail sector. And what they discovered was the best teaching and learning happened in the workplace. So the employees gained both knowledge from the classroom and skills and competencies from the workplace. So it was a win-win, and it was also a cost-effective delivery model. So yeah, it was the most, or is the most successful retail management training program in Ireland. And one of his messages is that colleges and universities need to accept that the classroom isn't the sole learning environment or even the primary learning environment, and that we need to start planning for this shift.
Yeah, right. In that case, would the credential come from both the retail organization and a post-secondary institution?
Yeah.
It would have.
Yeah. So the employees in the retail sector, they could then, it would give them credits at the post-secondary level, and that they could then add on to those credits and ladder them into, a credential and eventually into a degree. So yeah.
Yeah. And Nicole, did you notice, we learned about so many interesting initiatives like Ireland and what they're doing to invest in the national prior learning framework with all of their post-secondaries, Iceland funding their 17 lifelong learning centers that has such a strong validation component, Sweden, over 3 million euros a year just for the validation of prior learning, Luxembourg's government's heavily involved, and then you have all those European organizations like OECD and UNESCO and the European Commission, and it seemed like those, for me anyways, that was a pattern I saw, was that those organizations or institutions or post-secondary schools that were doing the most innovative and the most proactive work around prior learning were those that had support of the government and or had some really good funding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
kept waiting for you to mention if Canada, if there was an initiative in Canada that was highlighted at the conference.
That's such a good comment about Canada over and over again. Hey, Nicole,
Yeah.
people were commenting on the Canada has a place in the world, or a reputation of being one of the leaders in prior learning assessment. And that was echoed over and over again, right to the point that the last day of the conference, a couple of people asked if Canada was going to host the next one in 2024, because they only do it every 2 years. And then the last comment I had on that for the conference was a woman from Greenland, and she was involved in the coordination of this conference. And she said, "So I heard you guys are hosting the next one." It's just like, are we? So actually, we're going to explore doing it, co-hosting it with Ireland. But yeah, I did feel a little bit of pride that Canada has such a reputation.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking about the logistics of the conference, how many workshops were there in total, or presentations?
Maybe about 20, Nicole. It was a different conference from others I've been to, because they had more plenary sessions, meaning everybody came together and listened to plenary sessions. That's where Dr. Nan Travers talked about credential as you go, and UNESCO's, one of their researchers, Marie Macaulay, she did an excellent presentation as well. And then what they did was there was maybe about 14 other sessions, and everybody did their presentation twice, so that if you missed it because you were at another one, you got to go, there was more flexibility, you didn't miss as much. I would say the only detractant from this is that the presentations were really fast and really condensed, with packed full of information. And they left every session had an opportunity to discuss what this meant for lifelong learning. So that was really good. I'm so glad that, I'm not sure if we've mentioned this, but the website has the PowerPoints and a lot of the videos from the conference. So it's already loaded. It's completely free to access. And I know, Andrew, you're going to put the link in for that. So I know I'll go back and listen to a few of them and get the presentation notes as well.
That's great, because our listeners will definitely benefit from this information. For those who couldn't attend, at least they can see the recordings and materials.
Yeah.
I have another question. I believe you've been to the conference several times, right? Is that correct?
This is Susan. It was my first time, but it was Nicole's second one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps you saw a change, Nicole. I'm just curious, or maybe you've heard from other people about how it's evolved over the years, if it has, perhaps not. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I was in the one before the pandemic hit, and that was in Berlin. And, I wish I should have gone back and seen how many people attended that one. It felt like more, but it may not have been. It was structured a little bit differently, but it was still, jam-packed full of workshops and whatnot. And I don't know if I know there was talk a bit at this conference that, it kind of feels like we've been discussing the same kind of issues, over the years, but they're kind of compacting and becoming more urgent. And so it just, to me, it felt at this one like there was, there's more action taking place right now, and maybe a bit more funding, within countries toward PLAR. So that was encouraging. I kind of felt like there was a little bit of a shift there. So sounds
like that's some evidence of that progress has been made towards what the goals that were discussed some years ago.
Right.
Nicole, when you shared that there seems to be a little bit more of a shift or a focus on prior learning assessment. I really felt that there too as well. And I went to this one session, Kees Schur from the European Center Evaluation talked about, he combined a talk on Many people, when they talk about the labor market, they'll talk about us being in the fourth industrial revolution, but he talked about the fifth industrial revolution and then combine that with society 5.0 and what this means for our advancement in PLAR. So he talked about some of those huge changes that are going to impact our labor market. They're not going to, they already are. So he talked about, cyberspace and big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning and cobots and robots and the Internet of Things and structure, like I could keep going on, but essentially how that's really changing people's career. We're having more and more career shifts than at any other time in history. Individuals are taking more responsibility for their careers, whereas once it was up to the employers to kind of guide and navigate careers. And we talked about the importance of lifelong and life-wide learning, because as these changes are happening and the pace of these changes are so quick. And he gave this one stat, and he said that 70 to 94% of all learning is informal. And with this changing world, we really need to be able to validate this informal and non-formal learning in a much quicker way, in a much more intentional way than we've ever done. I mean, he even talked about blockchain to track learning. So that was, I think, some of the impetus that's really driving that interest in PLAR. And I know our provincial government and our federal government in Canada has been very interested in how can they use PLAR for reskilling, upskilling, and career resiliency. And I would say what we saw at the conference is they're a little bit ahead of us in this, and maybe as much as a year or two ahead of us.
Yeah, I agree. And Susan, an interesting, I was talking about this changing world that we're in. There was an interesting example from Northern Ireland around the polarization of skills. Let me just see. It was given by Goodfinna. I won't butcher her last name, but she's from the Educational Training Center for Public Employees, and she was working on a really interesting scenario. So there's a growing issue of polarization of jobs, meaning that jobs are becoming either too simple or too complex because of automation. So she had said that there's an estimated 28% of jobs that will become automated within the next 10 to 15 years, and another 60% of jobs that are considered relatively likely to become at least partially automated. So what they did, they realized that they needed a recognition of skills within this northern town in Iceland. And so they worked with these mature employees who were working at Directorate of Labor. There was about 25, Directorate of Labor, there's about 25 employees. And so they were actually considering dismissing 7 of their employees because they didn't have the skills to kind of keep up with the increasing complexities of the work. And they were thinking about then hiring new people. So this educational training center came in, and they said, you know what, let's recognize the skills of these employees. The population of the town is about 470 people. So there'd be recruiting challenges. So they had a goal to identify the current skills and offer training so that these people could take on more complex tasks. And it was really successful. So they identified invisible skills and tacit knowledge that became visible. It increased the confidence of the employees. There was greater job satisfaction and workplace culture, and they got a pay raise. So it was kind of a win-win all around. And I just thought that was a really neat example of addressing kind of this quickly changing world that we're in around this polarization of skills. So
yeah, and what a dramatic difference on morale, taking
Yes.
that approach as opposed to the initial plan that they had, which would have been heartbreaking for so many
Exactly.
families.
Yeah.
There was one session, one of the plenary sessions. I have no idea how they found this person, but he was the mayor of Reykjavik, of all places. And he shared his journey in life and the impact that PLAR had on it. And he was in the towards the end of our session, and first, before he became mayor, he was an actor and a comedian, but high energy, but do you mind if I just share a little bit about his story? Because I think that just drills right down to the importance and the value to the individual of PLAR.
Oh, please, yes, go ahead.
Okay. So I actually listened to his video again today, preparing for this podcast, because I knew it had left an indelible impression for me, but I couldn't quite remember why. So he shared a story, and his story was very scattered. He started in the middle, went to the beginning, went to the end, went back to the middle. So it was hard to kind of get his story. But then as you learned more about him, it made complete sense. He grew up always knowing he was different. People told him he was different. He spent 2 years before he even went to kindergarten with going through different assessments and psychiatrists and psychologists. They started to label him with developmental delays and being different and unique. And when he started school, that didn't go very well. And they kept him isolated from other students because he was really jittery and had, as he described it, bad impulse control and spoke out of turn a lot. One of the things he talked about was having absolutely no concept of time. He knew in the winter, one day you got presents and you got to read at night. He loved reading. But he, if you had to get him to explain to you the months or the days or numbers, he just couldn't do it. He really struggled with learning how to write, not to read, but to write, because he kept writing letters backwards. And one of the saddest things he shared was at the age of 12, he realized he couldn't even spell his own name. That's how severe it was. They took him out of public school and put him in a private boarding school, where essentially he said that they put the troublemakers that just didn't fit in. So he was really ostracized and isolated. And he talked about the Pink Floyd song, "Hey, teachers, leave us kids alone." But he sang it way better than that. And he talked about really hating school and being rebellious. And so when he got to the end of his secondary education, so what would be our equivalent to grade 12, he actually looked at going to university, which his mother had said was never a possibility because he always struggled with numbers and writing. And he did some laboring jobs that found that his life was really limited, and moved to Sweden, did more laboring work there, and learned to speak Swedish fluently. At that time, he was also getting diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, but those labels weren't given to him till a little later. I think he said he was born in 1967. So he moved to Sweden, learned the language, got some good work, started moving into the realm of acting, and then that led to comedic work. And when he moved back to Reykjavik, he decided that, hey, you know what, got a little bit of confidence here. I'm going to go do an assessment, get some credits for the Swedish language I have. And as luck would have it, they tested him 100% in his ability to read and write Swedish. And he could read it really well, he could speak it well, but he couldn't write it. He got 0 on that assessment test, a zero. And he said that was the most humiliating part of his post-secondary attempt, and just squashed him. And then Nicole mentioned earlier about the lifelong learning centers in Iceland. In 2004, so not that long ago, one of the lifelong learning centers reached out to him and said, I don't know what they said, but they thought that he had some prior learning that he could maybe get some credit for. And in his words, they organized the clutter that was his history. So they talked to him and they asked him questions about where he had been, what he had been doing, what had he been learning, how had he been learning, did he have any evidence of it, any certificates, any references, any performance evaluations. And they were able to make sense of all that in a way he never could with the dyslexia and the ADHD. And it was all validated. And he said that just gave him so much confidence about who he was as a person, his sense of self-worth, both professionally and personally. And that gave him the motivation to think, you know what, maybe I just think different than other people. I'm not stupid, I'm not slow, I'm just different, and I have a lot to contribute. And just last year, he graduated with his Master's of Fine Arts. And when you think about that story from somebody who went from being very ostracized and isolated and thinking he was different and thinking he didn't have anything to contribute to society in general, he ended his talk by saying what PLAR, or what validation of prior learning, did for him was finally it gave him a sense of confidence, but more importantly, he summed it up in 4 simple words. Finally, I was somebody. And those words really echoed with me over the weeks and months that we've been back, weeks, I guess, from Iceland. It wasn't that long ago. But to see that power and that transformative impact that RPL had on his life trajectory, and now to think of him as a mayor, as a politician, and how much he's given back to his communities, it just was such a good story to wrap up that conference with.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's amazing that they identified him and brought him to the conference and that he was open to speaking about it there. What a gift.
Yeah, it was such a good story. And I know in the work that we do at TRU and the work that you do at North Island College and the other PLAR groups around the province, sometimes we lose sight of this, right? We lose sight of the impact that PLAR has and how it transforms life. And yes, we're assessing a small continuing of their learning, but it's so much bigger than that for so many people.
Mm-hmm. It really can be a turning point for some people.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Very good. Well, I think that is a lovely note to conclude on, unless there's anything else that you would like to share about this wonderful conference, this wonderful experience that you had.
Yeah, there was one final point, Natalie, I'd love to be able to speak to is just, Susan and I were talking earlier today around kind of just the complexity around, there was a lot of talk around really individualizing, this experience of validating learning for these people. And it's really complex and it can get messy because every individual has their own learning experiences. And so the assessment processes can get complex and messy as well. And so, there was some talk around how this individualized approach can be expensive, but there was an interesting note that really stood out for me. It's important to remember that not validating becomes expensive for society as a whole if we don't develop the existing skills of the current workforce. So, each time we think about costs around this, I'm not sure how they measured this, but for every euro put into validation of learning, 2.56 euros came back to the labor market and society in general. So just some stats to show that, the more we invest in this, in PLAR and validation of prior learning, it's going to come back twofold and more to society and to our to the workforce and to everyone as a whole. So and just a note around that we need standards that are open enough to capture these complexities and recognize the holistic character of it. It's kind of creating an ecosystem of sorts where there's this web of related systems speaking to one another in order to simplify it a bit, even within the complexity. So I thought that was really interesting. And it actually, it made me think of, I kind of mentioned earlier, how it's, PLAR it seems to be growing more and more necessary rather than just kind of optional. And it makes me think of this quotation I learned long ago. It's a Virginia Satir one, but that we often don't change until it hurts too bad to stay the same. And with the changing world, I just think we're really at this kind of pivotal time where we need to start, taking action with this.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be fascinating to see behind the curtain of how they get the number, right? To see the calculations behind it. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's beyond a nice to have.
Right.
More of a necessity.
Yeah. It's getting that way for sure.
I think I could sum it up by saying I'm so happy we made the time and found the money to go to that. To be with colleagues that just wanted to talk about PLAR or the 8 other names it has, 10 other names. It just felt like such a gift, and to come back so energized and rejuvenated and hopeful about working together to work through the complexities and to continue the supportive nature that the PLAR community has. It was really well worth the time and the expense.
Absolutely.
And I would like to say that I'm thrilled that the two of you did find the way to get there and invested the time and personal energy, professional energy to be there, because you do such wonderful work, both of you, in setting the tone in Canada, in BC and in Canada, for PLAR and for PLAR practitioners, myself included. And so I know that I benefit from that work that you put in to go there. So thank you for that. For those of us who couldn't make it this year, but perhaps can go in 2 years, especially if it's here.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Thank you,
Yeah.
Natalie. Thanks for that.
Well, I think that brings us to the end. So on behalf of Andrew and myself and the listeners, I would like to thank you both for making the time to share your experiences with us. And we will be sure to put information about the VPL Biennale website in the notes so that listeners have access to it. They can check for videos and PowerPoints that may be available.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Andrew. That was fun.
Thank you, Susan and Nicole.